Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to tell you all about Mayme Morrison. I appreciate the opportunity. Before we get started, as I give you a little backstory about how I found out about Mayme Morrison, I was actually involved with a project to place a historical marker in Callahan Park in Nevada City for Ellen Clark Sargent, who was very instrumental in the suffrage movement, both in California and nationally. And while I was researching a particular issue, Mayme Morrison's name just kept popping up on Google and newspaper articles, and I thought, who in the world is Mayme Morrison? I've never heard of her before. And being an amateur genealogist and historian, I had to go down the rabbit hole, right? So I found Mayme Morrison. I was really glad that I did. And then by fortuitous happenstance, I guess you could say, I found out that one of her granddaughters, Kathleen Lombardi, was a member of the same DAR, Daughters of American Revolution chapter, as myself. And we got to talking, and all along at this time when I was talking with her about Mayme, the Nevada County Historical Society, I said, oh, I found this woman. She's just so interesting. And they said, we'd like you to write an article. So I asked Kathleen if I could interview her, and she said, absolutely. And of course, I continued my research on genealogical and historical research on Mayme. And she said, would you like to talk to my cousin, Mary Ellen Schultz? She might want to be interviewed too, because of course you have two people with different experiences of the same person. I said, absolutely. So I was able to interview them, and they also graciously allowed me to use some family photos that they had in the article for the Historical Society, and which I'm going to use this evening. Now, I don't know why this is changing without my telling it to, but the first slide that I showed was some article from the California San Francisco Call of 1912, where she did an extensive interview about her adventures. And they show her kind of as a rough and tumble cowgirl. And she did work on a ranch, but she was not rough and tumble. This is Mayme as a young woman about the time that she would have been going about the country looking for her voters to register. And this is her later in life. So to understand Mayme, well, I'll tell you, she was born Mayme Patricia C. Morrison in Rough and Ready in 1883, and about 40 years after the 1848 convention at Seneca Falls. And I mention that because it's important when you understand her family history, and I'll get into that in a little bit, and then the contemporaneous events where she came of age as a young woman and did what she did. So Mayme's parents were Daniel Charles Morrison and Anna Mary Flint. Mayme was one of three girls. Her sisters were Martina and Madeline, always called Dolly. Mr. Morrison was an immigrant from Nova Scotia. He came to the United States about 1862 and eventually made his way to California like so many other people did. He was a stonemason by trade, and at one point, he had the largest marble and granite quarry in the county, so he did quite well there. And he also ran the Morrison Ranch at Rough and Ready with the help of his wife and his three daughters. He became a naturalized citizen in 1892 and immediately registered to vote. And he became politically active thereafter for the rest of his life, and he was also very involved in the community. Mrs. Morrison, and importantly, he believed that women should have the right to vote. He was a strong supporter of women's rights, and he encouraged his wife and his daughters to be strong, independent, self-sufficient women, and pushed them along to become as politically active as they could be until circumstances changed where they could become completely politically active. Mayme's mother, Anna Mary Flint, was born at the old Beyer Ranch in Smartsville, and at some point she and her family moved to Rough and Ready. And she was involved in the suffrage movement locally. and worked the Rough and Ready precinct and ran for a position on the school board when women were given the franchise in 1911 in California. And she lived long enough, as did Mr. Morrison, to see the passage of the 19th Amendment, which I think is really nice. Now, according to Mayme's granddaughters, Kathleen and Mary Ellen, Mrs. Morrison had a credo, and let me see if I can bring that up. Yeah. To be political, independent, self-sufficient, courageous, and unafraid of, whoops, wrong one, is not doing what it's supposed to do. I'm so sorry. There we go. Never take no for an answer, stand up for your rights, and never back down from any man or woman, for that matter. And the granddaughters told me that all of the women in the Morrison family were really women's livers, way ahead of their time. Now, Mayme took the credo to heart because at one point when she was just a girl, she got into an altercation with a local boy who ended up slapping her in the face. And she didn't take that lightly. She pressed charges and took him to court. And you can imagine that was quite a notoriety, and it was in the local newspapers. That's how I found out about the story, and then corroborated it with the granddaughters. They said, oh yeah, we heard that story all the time. Now, the Morrisons were all hardworking people. The stone quarry was one business. They had a big ranch out in Rough and Ready, and all the girls had to work on the ranch as well as Mrs. Morrison. And the granddaughters told me the Morrison family was land rich and dirt poor, so they turned their hand to anything they could. And Mayme was a good businesswoman. Even as a young girl, she raised turkeys and chickens, and she used them and their eggs to barter for anything that the family might need, or anything that she might want, you know, as a little goodie, or to pay for doctor's bills. And as she got older, she worked 30 acres of the farm devoted to wheat, and she did all the work and harvested it, and she was able to always sell it at a good price. So she must be a good bargainer, I think. And when her parents' health began to fail, she actually took over the running of the ranch. And even though they worked hard, the Morrison women were avid readers. They were very involved in reading the newspaper, politically getting into good debates, and I can imagine there was very interesting conversations around the dinner table at the Morrison family ranch. And Mayme was very popular, and she was involved with the community, and she liked to have fun. And she grew prize-winning vegetables, and here's a picture of her. This is a picture of the front of the Morrison Ranch, and this is actually her sister Martina, and this is Mayme. You can't really see it, unfortunately, but she's got a blue ribbon here, so she must have won something like at the county fair. And she was a member of the Women of Woodcraft, which was an auxiliary of the Woodmen of the World, a benevolent society, helping members of the community. And she also was an excellent horsewoman, and her skills were known throughout the county, and she is quoted as saying, "I am unafraid of anything in the shape of a horse." So you might enjoy that one. And she thought nothing of spending long hours riding from Rough and Ready to Nevada City to Grass Valley. In fact, she and her sister Martina at one point thought it would be fun to ride from Rough and Ready to Sacramento to, yeah, hello, to enter into some equestrian, events, because they could do all these different things with their horses. That plan was shelved because their mother, unfortunately, had a stroke about the same time. And while her mother, Mrs. Morrison, wanted her girls to be self-sufficient and independent, she also wanted them to be ladies, prim and proper. That was probably required back then. So this is Mayme on her horse, and she always rode side saddle. This is her in her suffragette whites. She always wore a hat like the one she has on. And when she went out riding out through the country, she rode side saddle with a skirt and blouse and whatever she needed. And she, sorry, I've lost my place here. So her strong personality, tenacity, her knowledge of politics, and her ability to ride a horse is really what a nexus that came together for her in 1912 when she decided that she was going to apply for the position of Deputy Registrar of Voters. And she marched down to the registrar and said, I want to apply for the job, and I can find 300 to 500 eligible voters to register. Well, the registrar was like, what makes you think you can do that, young lady? And she said, just give me the job, and I'll show you. Well, she must have been very persuasive because she got the position for the Rough and Ready district, and she I think by newspaper reports, she got the job in February of 1912. By March, she had registered 300 voters, and by April, she had registered 500. Now, how did she do this? Well, she rode her horse all over the county from dawn to dusk, and she had to go out to remote lumber camps, mining camps, farms, ranches, within her district, and she would just carry what she needed. She brought a gun. She was a good shot, and supposedly the gun was just for rattlesnakes to protect her horse, but who knows? And her registration book, her materials that she needed to register people, and any other minimal supplies that she needed. And if she was too far from home to get back of an evening, she'd just build a fire, roll up in her blankets, and go to sleep. While it was hard work, she loved being so independent and enjoyed all of her adventures along the way. And she had a lot of adventures. She said she could always extricate herself from any ordinary difficulty. And men found her quite a novelty when she rode up into an old lumber camp or mining camp. They would line up just to simply shake her hand, and then she'd get them to register if they were eligible. And in one camp, she told the story that two miners got into fisticuffs over who was going to cook dinner for her, and she made short work of that and said, you're not cooking dinner, I'll cook the dinner. So she was a bit of a peacemaker, too. And she received numerous marriage proposals, not unsurprisingly, and to her great amusement. And she declined, of course, good-naturedly, while still getting the moonstruck suitors to who were eligible to register to vote. And she didn't just look for eligible voters far from home. She did it locally as well. So if she went to a dance, she had a registration book. And she wouldn't dance with a young man, if he was eligible to vote, until he registered. So her exploits in rounding up voters made a lot of local news, and it also became national. There's lots of different newspapers from Indianapolis, as far back as Massachusetts, that picked up this story. And so she had quite a bit of fame. And I think that her fame and well-earned respect for what she did, what she was able to accomplish as a go-getter in the community, along with her intelligence and tenacity, is probably the reason that she was elected as the first female vice president for the Republican Convention locally in 1912. And she had an active part. You see in the newspaper when they're doing the platform, her name is there, there's comments. She wasn't a token figure, in other words. And after a banner year in 1912, she continued on as an independent and self-sufficient woman and continued to be political. She decided that she probably should get a more advanced education, so she went to Heald College in Marysville, and she studied business and stenography, and she worked for several years in the county for local businesses as an administrative assistant or secretary or whatever it might be with her skills. And at the age of 32, she decided she was going to get married. And she married George Cole, from a well-known family in the county. And they owned extensive ranch lands and so forth. So she might have thought, good catch. He's got land, maybe some money. But unfortunately, it wasn't a very happy marriage, according to the granddaughters. But she did have 3 girls who she passed that credo down to. And the ranch was a 160-acre ranch down at Wolf, which no longer exists as a village, I guess it would have been. But it would be in the area of Cole Road, Duggins, Garden Bar, that area, and Wolf Road. So that's where the ranch was. And she remained politically active for the rest of her life, always involved in local politics, serving as a precinct supervisor, election monitor, passed down her mother's credo to her daughters and the granddaughters. And the granddaughters told me that she had very strong belief in women's rights, and she passed that down to her daughters and granddaughters. She died in 1962. She's buried in Clear Creek Cemetery in Grass Valley. Oh, I didn't talk about this, but this is, I felt it was getting a little bit too long, so I didn't go into this. But this is a picture of, in Ellen Clark Sargent's home. This is Ellen Clark Sargent here, hosting Susan B. Anthony and some of the other local women that were so involved with the suffragette movement. And of course, that was very informative to what Mayme did and to her family. And let's see here, that's their headstone. And then she died, and a year after her death, she made the news again in Ripley's Believe It or Not, which was kind of fun. And it was kind of fun for me because 108 years after women got the vote, secured the vote in California, I discovered her. So she was newly discovered in 2020, for me. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about Mayme and her exploits. She was quite a character. Thank you.